Of 37 days of Dwarf, day 23. Give me just a second to get things set up here. Now, for those of you who were with us the other night, we were looking at a concept proposed by one of the audience members that we design a fortress built around the notion that we have separate subforts for different guilds or castes of our dwarves, so that we can effectively say put the metalsmiths and the jewelry crafting folks into one subfort and have themselves a tavern and a temple and everything that they need close to hand, raise their own food, produce their own goods, and never need to leave their subfort except for rare excursions off to the Weaver's Hall to grab their clothing every couple of years. I thought that was an interesting concept, so we were going to see about maybe doing something where we design a world and run that. So I'm going to put the fortress from last night on pause, and we're going to see if we can't roll out an example of that. All right, so let's get underway. Let's retitle this bad boy. There we go. Get some seeds put into that thing. Got him named properly. Save that. Run the world. See what we end up with here. We're going to run about 200 years of world history, so it looks like we're off to a good start there. Looks like all the volcanoes in this world ended up right here. One way down here, and one way over here, and then everything else is like right there. Volcanoes. Volcanoes everywhere. I hope everyone out there is having a wonderful evening tonight. We are trucking on towards our goal, only about a third of the way to it now, but we are still closing in on it. Alright, let's export our world for legends. And I guess we can accept that. Let's go ahead and do a legends export. What's your question, Devil's Dandruff? What's your question? First what? First one to say something tonight? Yeah, so far. It's always quiet when it gets started. So Now that we've got our world, let's go ahead and go into that bad boy, but we'll pretend we're going into Legends mode for just a minute. Do a quick export. And there's a DF hack command I need to run here. And I gotta remember what it is here. Hang on a second. It's Ew. I'll be damned. You can actually do that? I didn't know you could do that. So while looking this up, I came across something. You can actually use the Legends viewer, the in-game Legends viewer, mind you, the in-game Legends viewer. While you are running your game, DF Hack can open Legends mode and then switch you back. Wow. Fantastic. Interesting. Forgot to exit Steam. Probably want to bring that down too, don't I? Yep, yep, yep. Okay, so let's go ahead and get. And it's going to export all of our Legends information for us so we can view it later. But what I didn't know, and what I just came across while I was trying to remember the command here, is that you can actually use Legends Viewer in the in-game Legends Viewer in while you're playing your fortress. You can effectively pause the game, open Legends mode up, and take a look at things using DF Hack. Have you built a few forts? Have you played before? Because we're jumping in, I wouldn't say at the shallow end of the pool, but not necessarily all the way at the deep end either. Just maybe a little deeper than the first timer may be ready for if you're not getting some explanation along the way. Okay, so you've started the game. You understand there are dwarves and that they start off around a wagon in fortress mode. And okay, cool. You'll be all right. We'll be able to ease you into it a little bit. What we're going to do tonight is we're trying out a different fortress design model. Okay. Okay. Well, if you've watched, then you're going to be all right. I think for the most part, as long as you've got some familiarity with what I'm going to try and accomplish. You understand what I'm saying in terms of building a fort and defending it and such. I'll try to explain things as I go along. Don't hesitate to ask questions. I love helping new folks. You can ask anybody. It's not my idea. One of the audience members last night proposed the concept, and so I'm going to try and implement it. We'll give it a go. I put the other port on pause, and we'll start it out. We'll start from scratch, basically, with a new world, new embark. So if you've never really played before, this is basically going to come in at you like you're starting from a new fort, right? So you're going to get from the ground up. You're going to get an idea. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say you build your fort the way I'm going to do that. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say you're going to want to build your fort the way I'm going to build it, but I will talk about why I'm building it the way I'm doing it. You know what I'm saying? This is an experimental kind of thing, and I don't promise that this is the right way to do it. Where I deviate will be in terms of architecture. Usually, I build like if you can imagine an underground skyscraper, kind of a cylinder or a square with the levels kind of descending through the earth. Yeah, the this time out we may get something a little less. It may not work. I mean, it may absolutely blow up in my face. So keep that in mind. But we'll see what we can find. So now that I've exported my legend stuff, now you asked what all this meant. So let me show you what I mean a little bit. Legends mode is one of these other modes that you don't. It's not really a game as such. This is more of like a history viewer. Your world has a huge amount of history if you've let it run for any length of time, and if it's at all big with enough population in it, then there is an enormous amount of history. There were 201,580 significant events in our world prior to the fortress we're getting ready to build. So from the dawn of time to now, the first 200 years, plus prehistory, however long that's supposed to have been. And all of that is here. All of it. You can run down through all of the years of the world and all of the events that happened. You can look at any given region or artifact that was created or place in the world, a city or a cave that's claimed by some ferocious beast, or all the historical figures who've lived and died. So here, for example, let's take this first one because they're dead. It's a good choice. They died in the year 144, about 56 years before our fortress is going to get underway. And this is that Hydra's entire life history, their fights, who they killed, where they ransacked, all their notable kills, all the groups they made friends or enemies with, you know, all of not just their notable kills of like sentience, but it also keeps track of like all the kills that they made on animals who happen to be part of this settlement. All of this detail is all here. It's all here all the time in every fortress, all of it. And I mean in levels of, I mean, here's civilizations and other entities. So these are all different groups, right? This the Socketed Haim was a dwarven group from, and this is a region. It's not actually like an extra dimension. It's just the name of a region. Um, and then this is the who became the noble members of this dwarven group, and the entire history of the dwarven group. And this giant dingo became an enemy of the group in the year 24. Apparently, it probably killed one of their guys. I'm guessing because it's got a name. You follow me? It got named. Um, Here's the thing. A lot of this stuff is what I'm going to refer to as story level simulation. It's not necessarily bad, but a lot of it is going to be below the level you're going to care about mechanically in terms of gameplay. It's wonderful that it's all there. Make no mistake, I would not want to lose it for a moment, any of it. But you won't normally need to delve that kind of stuff. It's just sort of background history for your world, yeah? Now, it does come to bear if in the background history of your world the goblins declared war on the group of dwarves you're coming from, then your fortress is going to start off at war with those goblins, right? Or the elves or the humans or whoever, whatever. Maybe you've made an enemy of some giant beast, and your civilization is going to, suffer attacks from it. And your fortress might. You see what I'm saying? It comes to bear, but you don't necessarily have to be aware of it. It's just out there if you're curious. Maybe you want to know about, your king comes to visit you in the first year, and you want to know what happened to your world that causes the king to favor your fortress over wherever he came from. You know what I'm saying? Because you're in a dirt hole in the ground, and the king shows up, says, "I'm going to live here now." Well, what made him do that? Well, it turns out your hometown, your home city's central capital got sacked by the goblins or whatever. That's all in history mode. It's all in legends there. Now I don't play it myself, but there's also adventurer mode. Right, exactly. Something must have happened, and it could have been different things. Maybe a change in leadership, a civil war, a split in the group. The goblins came and sacked it, and like I said, there's lots of stuff that could have happened. Um, Adventurer mode is a different focus from what I'm going to be showing you tonight, and I won't demonstrate adventure mode. I don't really care for it personally. That's why I don't demonstrate it. But if you've ever played any of the old roguelike games, the old terminal-based roguelike games like Angband or NetHack or Moria, uh, tile set based games where you play a single adventurer, typically who has to delve through hundreds of levels of randomly generated dungeons and that kind of thing. Adventurer mode is going to be very familiar to you in that sense because that's basically what you're doing. You're going to start off with an adventurer, you're going to set off on quests and, follow along with quests given to you by townspeople, and they'll give you rewards, and you'll buy armor and explore the world. Maybe you'll come across the Necromancer Tower, learn the secrets of life and death, become an immortal undead, go on to loot the world for yourself. Who knows? Maybe you'll fight a dragon and get burned alive. Maybe you'll kill a bronze colossus with a fluffy wombler. There are some crazy adventurer stories out there. But I don't much care for Dwarf Fortress's adventure mode. That's just a personal thing. It's not necessarily that it's bad, it's just not to my taste. So I don't demonstrate that one. But I do demonstrate Fortress mode, and we're going to demonstrate that one tonight. Now, as far as Legends mode goes, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but since we're doing this all out of the starter pack, and you missed me starting it up since I'm continuing this series for now for a while, let me pull up one of the utilities here. All right, now this loads all the data on our world. This is the same Legends viewer, except this is like an external utility that's been provided for us. So let me back up a half step here, because you missed the first of this, I'm guessing, and let's kind of back up a step. This is the starter. What was for the starter pack? It comes with Dwarf Fortress included, and a bunch of user-friendly utilities to make the experience better. We're going to make extensive use of Sound Sense to provide sound for the game, and Dwarf Therapist to help control our dwarven labor. We won't get into those just yet. I'll get to them later. But be aware that I'm going to use some effectively third-party utilities to help me manage the game. Dwarf Fortress is a wonderful game, but out of the box, it's a little difficult or painful to control. It feels like repetitive stress injury in a box to me. But Dwarf Therapist then fixes 90% of that. And Sound Sense helps us kind of keep track of what's going on in our fortress to a degree by listening to it. You know, just like you would in any other game, the sounds give you cues, and they will here too. We'll use the multi-level view, so we'll actually be able to see more than one floor at a time. If we're looking down, say, from the top of a valley, we'll be able to see a few levels of the valley, maybe even down to the valley floor if it's not too deep. Normally, when you look at Dwarf Fortress, you only see one level at a time. Sound cues are wonderful, but Dwarf Fortress doesn't have really any by vanilla. Nothing like what Sound Sense will provide for us. Now, it can be a little annoying, and if it starts to get so, let me know. I can turn it down or modify what sounds are playing. You know, we can tweak it a bit. But it helps me keep track of what's going on without so that I can focus on the audience and also focus on the game and also kind of keep track of what I'm doing at the same time, which is sometimes difficult on its own. We're going to use the Vettlinger tile set. That's what we're set up for. So we're not using the standard ASCII. If you're used to that, it may be a little weird at first. But we're effectively going to be playing the game with I wouldn't call it a facelift, I'd call it a mask over the front of it. It makes everything a little prettier. Our dwarves look like dwarves instead of ASCII colored faces. But at the same time, there's nothing we're doing there that's not already in the vanilla game. We've just changed how it looks. Now I've set up a few of these options by default. I turn off pet entombments to force my coffins to only be used by citizens. Let me think. I think everything else is pretty much vanilla. I think I turned up the population cap. My rig is usually okay up to a good number of things. And that's pretty much it. So let's bounce out of this. This is just like the front end, launcher, if you will, for the starter pack. And it just runs Dwarf Fortress for me. Now that we've loaded this up, we can come back here and you can actually get a graphic view of what all that information that's in Legends mode is all here now. That's what this utility does for us. Those historic, including that Hydra. This is the Hydra. These are the groups he made enemies with. Here's who he munched on. Here's a graph of all the events he was involved in and when. Here's the list, and how many entries in the log do you want? That kind of stuff. This is a nice user friendly way to delve that historical information for your world. Okay, now we don't have to really be aware of this stuff. Like I said, this is just I'm showing it to you for background purposes, because if you're new to Dwarf Fortress, you may not be aware of how much of this is out there, or you may have seen all of it. And forgive me if I'm, to use the proverbial, teaching my grandmother to suck eggs. All right, so let's close that because Legend Viewer is awesome, but it's not really why we're here. Now we are going to use some, in addition to Dwarf Therapist and Sound Sense, we're also going to use some DF hack tools, which I use to help me streamline or no, that's okay. Ask questions. If you have any questions, and I mean anything, do not hesitate to slow me to an absolute halt to ask questions. Any question. And I don't care how silly you think it is. I don't care if it makes me have to go backwards. Ask. Because we're here for two reasons and two reasons only. We're here to raise money for kids and teach people to play Dwarf Fortress. So you're in absolutely the right place to be asking whatever question pops into your head. Go for it. Shoot. Do not hesitate. And if I don't explain something and you're not sure what I did or why I did it and you want to know, stop me. Ask. I'm dead serious, man. I'm no sarcasm intended whatsoever. I love to help new players. Love to teach. I should have been a teacher, but I don't think we respect teachers in our society, which is a real shame. So instead, I raise money for kids once a year and teach people Dwarf Fortress. Okay, so here's the deal. Embark Assistant here is like an upgraded site finder. Okay, it allows us to much more specifically detail what we want. Oops, I got to back out. Wrong button. So let's go into Embark Assistant here, and we can go into, now we can hit Find Embark, and we can really specify this. The X dimension and Y dimension are how big our map will be once we arrive. That's 4 world tiles by 4 world tiles, which is pretty big. I probably would not go larger than 5 by 5, and that's really big. And I mean, like, really big. Like, you're wanting to do something huge. Um, Realistically, a 3 by 3 is probably enough for most people most of the time. I like to have a little more room around the edges. But keep in mind, that's 16 world tiles, and a 3 by 3 is 9. And as you go larger in terms of X or Y, and you adjust the number of world tiles up or down, you're impacting how fast Dwarf Fortress will run in the long haul. And this is a decision you make very early on. You don't get to change it later. So, don't get crazy until you know how Dwarf Fortress will run at the high end once you've got 150 dwarves running around doing labor all over your fortress, and also 100 invaders show up, and hey, there's also 50 bards trying to perform in your tavern. With that many number of things moving around, and then you start figuring in pasture animals and wildlife, there's a lot of stuff on. Um, there's a lot of stuff on the map for it to keep track of and move around, and so your game can really slow down quite a lot. Now, I do want to eliminate a couple things here. I don't normally play on evil terrain. Like, I don't. Like, it's not fun. Evil terrain deserves a special mention here. Uh, you missed our first session, which is like 3 hours of me going through initialization files and all sorts of data behind the scenes to show you what I'm setting up and why. Um, but Evil Terrain has a couple of features that I really don't want to play through. If you're feeling your oats and you want to go for it, hey, knock yourselves out. But I don't really regard it personally as fun, so I don't generally play there. Um, Evil Terrain will cause, for example, in many cases, dead animals and creatures to resurrect, to literally spontaneously come back from the dead and as undead and attempt to kill things. That they suddenly wake up with a thirst to kill the living, and that includes things like the butchery byproducts of your butcher's shop. So if you bring animals with you and you breed them and then you kill them, or you breed them and then they get killed and then they die, whatever, old age, whatever, they come back from the dead and try to kill your dwarves. So you can't bring animals. It's a whole different ball game, if you will, and we're not going to demonstrate it tonight. Now, aquifers deserve a special mention. In older forts, I would have said avoid aquifers at all costs. Don't have an aquifer. Because in the old world, there were only one type of aquifer, and it sucked. It's called a heavy aquifer. And now it's called a heavy aquifer. The difference between a light aquifer and a heavy aquifer is that a light aquifer is very easy to pierce using nothing more than standard mining techniques and some small materials that you'll accumulate during the puncturing of the aquifer. It's very rare to have a light aquifer that is so dangerous that it's actually going to present a flooding hazard, for example. At the same time, the a light aquifer is generally productive enough to serve as things like a source of water or a means to fill traps with water. Uh, reservoirs, not like a fill reservoir, right? You get an infinite source of water that's inside your fortress, and you don't have to worry about invaders in it because it comes out of the rock itself. It's beautiful, wonderful. A heavy aquifer is still just as dangerous and problematic to work through as it was before. If you insist on playing with a heavy aquifer, you really need to consult the wiki and learn how to pierce a heavy aquifer because there's a distinct set of techniques for doing that, and they are very complicated and very, very fiddly. If you screw them up, you start over, kind of stuff sometimes. Uh, Kinda. What you would do if you wanted to use a light aquifer for your traps is you would dig you dig into the aquifer from below to harvest the water, right? And you'd harvest it into like a catch pocket, and you'd hold it there, and you'd build up that reservoir. And then when the siege comes in, if you're going to use it for a drowning trap, you then bring the siege into wherever you're going to deploy the water at, and then you pull the water out of the catch pocket and pump it into wherever they are, or pull it out of the catch pocket and drain it into where they are, whichever. And they end up with drowning, and then the aquifer refills the catch pocket again. Now, it's slow to refill usually because a light aquifer is not super fast, but you're usually not deploying a drowning trap repeatedly if it's a fairly large one. And so, as long as the catch pocket is large enough to fill it, maybe once or twice or three times, then the fact that it takes a while to refill a charge isn't necessarily a problem. Yeah. Minimum river, if we can get it, I like a brook. Streams are okay. When you start getting up to the max rivers above that, it starts to get to either eat a large chunk of your surface or it means a lot of pathfinding for the water, which is kind of a problem. So, stream is usually about as high as I would go. Oh, devil's dandruff, you can do all sorts of things to your enemy. Here's a partial list because I'm sure I'm going to miss a few things. We could, for example, send out our militia and fight them in open combat. Decide we have no militia and send out all of our dwarves at once to try and wrestle them to death. We could lure them into traps that literally spring out of holes in the ground like some sort of Indiana Jones thing and deploy serrated discs and giant axe blades and spiked balls and try to bludgeon, cut, slice, and dice them until they die of it. We could deploy traps that spring out of the walls and deploy cages and trap our enemies inside. We can deploy specific types of traps that drown them, or flood hallways with magma, or crush them under giant drawbridges. Cliff with a brook might be hard, because brooks are because of the floor. I don't know that I've ever seen a brook with a waterfall. You understand what I'm saying? So you might get the cliff, but you won't get like the water coming down the cliff face. Oh, devils, there's all kinds of. I haven't even got started. Oh man, I haven't got started. Sick your war dogs on them. Sick your war bears on them. Sick your giant war bears on them. Release the elephants. Not enough? There's more. Archery, catapults, ballistas. Like I said, you can do things that, dunk your enemies into magma, drop them into a volcano, drop them from a strong height, and they'll take fall damage, break their legs, and, not be able to crawl out, run in and beat them to death with hammers. I mean, whatever works for you. There is. You can look for. Hang on, I think with the site finder, I think there is. Hang on a second. Let me look here. What was it? First off, make sure you're not turning on flat, and then look right here where it says minimum waterfall drop. If this is so, if you're looking, Griffiths, if what you're looking for is when you say a cliff, are you imagining, say, the water comes in at the top of the cliff and flows down the cliff face, and your base is like maybe at the base of the waterfall or behind the waterfall or something like that, and then the water kind of flows away from your base, something like that? If you do, you could use the minimum waterfall drop to try and look for, say, a one drop brook. It would have to have at least one level drop in it. You see what I'm saying? I don't know that you'll find that. I've never looked because I like flat and I'm never really looking for a cliff. But keep in mind, that might be worth a shot. Now, you'll need to have DF hack. This isn't vanilla, remember. But you can flip that on and it will add it to the site find list for you, which have at it. You see what I'm saying? That'll get you what you want, I think, if it exists. Now, if you can't get it with a brook, You'll do a few worlds and you'll never find one. Even if you leave all the other things off, if you set for brook and one minimum waterfall like that, and you can't find it in like 4 worlds, it probably never exists because those are the only criteria you're setting at that point. Yeah, yeah. You're probably going to end up having to get a stream at the very least, and maybe even larger, especially if you want a super giant cliff. Now, you don't really need a super giant cliff to get the waterfall. You'll have to kind of imagine a little bit if you want to do it that way. I wouldn't necessarily use a giant waterfall, but you can. You can see here that you can set a minimum waterfall drop that's just ginormous if you want to try and find one. A 50 Z level dropping waterfall is wow. Your fortress is enormously high at that point. You follow me? Tall. There's one other thing you might want to think about, Griffiths, when you're building your world, before you ever get to this point, when you're doing your world gen settings, the Z levels above ground, if you plan to have a tower, say at the top of your waterfall, the Z levels above ground is going to be impacted based on how that is above the waterfall. So, for example, let's say there's, say at the bottom, at the very bottom, it's all flat. It's only 2 levels on your map, one at the bottom and one at the top of the waterfall. I'm not going to pretend the cliff is very sheer. Um, let's call the bottom one 0, and let's say the waterfall is 20 levels high. The top level, then, let's call that level 20. Um, if you have the normal default number of levels above ground turned on, you can only build a tower up to about level 35. You follow me? Because there's only allowed 15 above ground level, and the top ground level is 20. So you might want to keep an eye on that. Now, don't go super high unless you really plan to use it all, because it can cause some pathfinding issues with wildlife, like flying birds and stuff. They can get a little wonky. But if you plan on building a tower, it's something to keep in mind. Now tonight I'm going to try and see if we can't get flat. Let's see if we can't do sand or clay and sand. I'm not set necessarily on the clay, but I'm gonna try. Flux. We're gonna shoot for the moon first, and then we'll come back and turn it off if we have to back it down. I don't care about freezing, but I don't want blood rain. Not today. And I don't want syndrome rain because that's even worse. No syndrome. Reanimation is right out. Now, most of those things will probably be eliminated just by eliminating evil terrain, but this explicitly says I don't care if it blows in from next door, I don't want it. Minimum adamantine we could set, but I'll leave it off for right now. Let's go down here to metal 1, and we'll set that to iron. And metal 2, because these are the things I like to try and find on my sites if I can. And metal 3, we're going to go for 10. Now, if you're looking to do something very specific, like, I don't know, mint aluminum or something, and you don't want to try and import it, then maybe you start with a site that has aluminum. It's still going to be hard to find. Just because you ask for it doesn't mean there's a lot of it, but there could be. So let's go down to, let's see here, yeah, economic 1. Let's see if we can get fire clay while we're at it. I mean, we're really shooting for the moon here. We may never find this if we ask for it. And we want elves, and we want humans, and we want goblins. And we'll save those settings for now. And we'll see what we can find in our world. Fine, we'll rip through the world, and it says, okay, I'm going to examine these candidates because they meet a bunch of your criteria. Let's see if any of them stay behind, because so far, not finding what we're looking for yet. We're going through the candidates pretty quick, and no finds. There are 5 world tiles, so there are a couple here, it looks like. So there are some places where we can get a combination of all the things we asked for on this world. Now, that may mean that we're giving up something else I don't want, so we'll have to look at it a little bit. But that was pretty specific when you stop to think about it. Stop and consider what I looked for in my world to get what I wanted, and found it in, what, 10 seconds or whatever, right? Normally in vanilla, to get that specific would require embarking and then doing test mining to see if the site has what you want, and then throwing the world away and regenerating it so it's clean and you can embark on it. And that's after you've tested, 50 or 100 sites potentially to find the combination of things that I just looked for. The information you get here, even if you're flipping through all these different views, is not as informative as what I just pulled out. This stuff here on the left is from SiteFinder, which is telling me, if what's there. Now, the way that SiteFinder works, a moment to describe this so that you don't get home and try this later and find out that there's something wrong with it and you come to me and go, it doesn't work. It does. But these green X's assume that the upper left corner of your embark area, whatever it is on that area. And if you told SiteFinder to find a 4x4, then you change your embark area to a 5x5, no promises that you get exactly what you had in mind unless you line it up appropriately. So keep it in mind. We set for a 4x4 and we're using a 4x4, so we don't have a problem. We're good to go. We could embark here. There is a stream, which is not ideal for me, but it would work. I really prefer a brook if I can get it because there's some issues with freezing water in the winter. That's a stream. Is it stream over here too? Yeah, stream there. And there's some way down there in the bottom right as well. Let's see what they are. Are they stream too? Oh, well, I can't embark there. That's right in the middle of somebody else's city. That's not going to work. Can't do that. I mean, it tracks the materials, but it didn't. And definitely, all of our neighbors are definitely present because we'd be embarking in the middle of one of their cities if we tried to do it here. They're not going to let us do that. So, stream it shall be. It appears. Let's see here. That's a stream too. Okay, well, let's see how that lines up. If I do it just like that, we get flat, 2 layers of soil. And if I go up here, what do we get? 3 layers of soil, it looks like maybe? Oh, that would be better. More soil is, if you're going to use the layers anyway, better. 3, that's a little better for my purposes, I think. Be nice if it had a giant chunk of aluminum sitting in the middle just for decoration purposes, but that would cause the stream to kind of run down the middle of our embark, which we could do, but it's a stream and it will freeze over, and like I said, that there's problems with that. I don't really want to do that. Although, if you have the notion to kind of build a fortress on an island, for example, you could do that relatively easily by embarking on a site like this one and then building your fortress next to the river and then trenching out around the fortress so that the river now flows through both channels. And it would, over time, fill that in and um, give you the effect you were looking for. Now, I don't really want to do it because, like I said, we're already getting the pathfinding from the water, and I'm trying to avoid excessive pathfinding hits. Light aquifer, 3 layers of soil, shallow metals on the other. Let's see, was this better in terms of metals, maybe? Let's look. Because I can do it way up here, and then it's not. Then it's back in a corner again. Still 1 metal and shallow metals, or deep metals. What about over here? What was the soil like? What do we get? Looks like 2 layers of soil here. We get kobolds if we're over here, though, for bonus points. Not much in the way of vegetation, though, and for new players, I would kind of suggest embarking somewhere where there was vegetation. Traditionally, dwarves embark in the mountains, but the reality is that building a fortress is a materials game, and if you can't guarantee that the materials are going to arrive, then you're really better off starting off where they exist. And that would mean, for me, in most cases, embarking in some place like a forest or a swamp, because the vegetation allows me to harvest food on site and cut wood for my construction needs if I need it, or to burn it for fuel, or to make training weapons out of it if I'm really pinched for something. I think we'll go here. Let's take a look at Prospect and see what it says in terms of materials. Prospect, I should say, is another DF hack tool. And it will allow us to take kind of an estimate of what's in our embark. Now, this is not an exact count, so when you get down here to these ones where it says 0, maybe there is one, maybe there isn't. It doesn't really have an exact count. But when you start talking about things like, say, the native gold, where it says there's 40,000 of them, you can be pretty sure that there's some damn native gold on the map. Likewise, limonite is 14,000. We're going to have no problem finding that. Let's see. The cassiterite is vanishingly rare. Anything that starts to get below 500, I start to say maybe you find it, maybe you don't, because it would require excavating a large chunk of the ground to find the one vein, maybe, or the two veins that represent that amount. And finding the one piece or two pieces of native platinum, vanishingly unlikely. Horn silver isn't any more valuable than native silver, so the fact that there might be some there doesn't mean squat. Um, we're primarily going to concern ourselves with garnierite and above in terms of quantity here. Tetrahedrite, we'll probably find some of it at some point, but it'll be later, and it probably will be later because of how relatively rare it is. Now, if we embark here, we're going to have sand in the first layer and fire clay in the second layer. Um, I'm not super pumped about getting the fire clay necessarily, but it doesn't hurt to have some on site. Fire clay can be used to make kiln products, pottery, basically, without having to glaze them for food purposes. For those of you who have never done pottery before, unglazed pottery of most types is called earthenware, and it is porous, so it will trap particles of food and bacteria, and over time, it will make you sick if you continually eat out of earthenware over and over again. Um, Sealed pottery is normally glazed, and the glaze actually undergoes a heat reaction and becomes part of the face of the stone that it's laid over, and so the earthenware is sealed up. Um, Certain clays and fired to certain temperatures become what is called stoneware, and that can have no porosity to it. So, for example, like porcelain, even without being glazed, can be fired hard and isn't porous enough to trap stuff in it. Um, Fire clay is porcelain clay, basically, in Dwarf Fortress. You don't need to glaze the products to be using it in food. Now, that's the only thing that you'd have to glaze is the food products. Clay is worthwhile for all other purposes right out of the box, regardless of what other type of clay it is. Fire clay has a couple of advantages: the lack of needing to glaze it for food purposes, and that it's slightly more valuable than other types of clay. So, fire clay products are slightly more valuable when they're made. Um, so it's not an essential. I wouldn't worry so much about clay. If I was going to worry about a sand or a soil, I would worry about the sand. Having sand on your site is far better than having clay. If you have both, bonus points, but if I have to choose one, sand, sand, sand. You can make glass out of sand, and glass is not only non porous and usable for everything right out of the gate, but it is usable for a variety of things: furniture and trinkets and book bindings. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Crazy variety of things you can make out of glass. Sand is an infinite material. Clay is not so much. Or at least I don't remember it being, because it was giving you boulders. I think now they have a clay zone, and so at that point, I think you can use fire clay the same way. But green glass is just as valuable, I believe, as fire clay out of the box. I'd have to double check. And being infinite, we can pick it up in sandbags, drag it down there. There's all sorts of other advantages to having sand right out of the gate. Limonite is an ore of iron. Sphalerite is an ore of zinc. Galena is lead and silver. Silver is obvious. Gold is obvious. Garnierite is nickel. Tetrahedrite is copper and silver. Bismuthinite is used with uh, cassiterite and, say, tetrahedrite, which is an ore of copper, to make bismuth bronze. Cassiterite is tin, and with the tetrahedrite could be used to make bronze. Though there's so little cassiterite here, although we might find that tin vein at some point, it's not likely we find it. We won't depend on making bronze from native materials. We will expect to go straight to iron because of its abundance. That said, we have marble on site, which is a flux stone we would need to make steel. We do not appear to have coal. So let's go back a step here. What if I ask for something different from SiteFinder? What if I said iron and tin, because we're likely to have copper? Copper's fairly common. And fire clay, and then we ask for... There you go, man. Forgotten beasts, boss. Dusts and poisons are nasty stuff. Alright, so let's see if we can get that too. I doubt it, but let's look. I very much doubt we get all of what we want. Uh-oh. let's restart it. Here we go. That's my fault. Like I said, it's me. All right, so Poisons and Syndrome's Devil, it's worth noting, can do all kinds of horrifying things right out of the box with no mods required. Um, poisons from forgotten beasts, basically abominations from before time. Um, can do all sorts of things from, oh look, it caused a tingling numbness, to, oh look, it causes total paralysis, to, oh look, it causes a dwarf's skin to all rot off. There you go, boss. That's Dwarf Fortress. Alright, so let's try this again with, slightly less crashing, we hope. Let's load our settings here. What did I ask for before? Yep, I did save it. We're good. Hit the site finder again. Now, if we get rid of the fire clay, I'm curious if I can add coal, because I'm not super stoked about necessarily having the porcelain, but having sand and oh, devils. This game is... Okay, so let me be honest with you here, man. I love this game, and you should learn this game. You really should. But you're going to have to be dedicated and willing to... I don't know how else to put it. You're going to have to be willing to play it, fuck it up, and start over. Play it, fuck it up, and start over. Play it, fuck it up, and start over. There's no other way to learn the game. There really isn't. I can show you so that you have an idea of what you're going to fuck up. But for every fuck up that I can teach you to avoid, there are 20 that I'm not going to tell you because I don't think to tell you that I'm doing it that way to avoid that fuck up. And you're going to find it the hard way. It's a beautiful, beautiful, sadistic master of a game. You know what I'm saying? It will just absolutely abuse you. And you'll love it. Yes, that's right. And that's part of the reason why I'm going to tell you why I'm doing things when I do them. Because I want you to understand, yes, there's an XKCD for that. Something about 10,000 mistakes. You can Google it. Basically, the old monk in the cubicle next door has made the same mistake 10,000 times. You don't want to be the old monk. Let's get rid of fire clay. Fire clay is wonderful. I encourage you to experiment with it, but if I can get glass and bituminous coal on the same site, well, then we're off to the races. That would do it, man. Syndromes are nasty. Alright, so let's go here and look at Finder again, and we'll turn off the fire clay and change it out for bituminous coal. I'll take lignite too if we can, but let's see if we can get bituminous coal first, since there is a difference. We'll go through the Finder again and see if we get anything that time. And there are 24 matching tiles so far with that. That's good. That's fantastic. We're going to get a much broader selection this time. Let's see here. This is a swamp down here, isn't it? Yeah, marsh and swamp. I'm looking at. Yeah, swamps and forest. That's actually kind of nice. If you can get, yeah, look at there, flat, and we can get the river in, or the stream in there. Let's see if we can get all of that we were asking for before. Except now, let's be a total Karen, so to speak, and get ourselves just the brook, if we can. And this might fail, and it'll tell you, oh, I can't find all that stuff. There'll be 0 tiles. But there's 11 tiles now that still match all of those things now. Brooks are wonderful. I love a good brook. Okay. Alright, so let's give ourselves a little room here. We're going to be like right adjacent to the elves here. We're like next door neighbors if we mark here. But brook, all the materials I wanted on site. Yeah. And the clay could very well be fire clay too. I don't know. Let's see here. What do we get? Not fire clay. We should still have clay that we can use. And we could harvest that and then glaze it if we wanted to use it for food. We can still make things out of it. No problem. If you get a high-skilled potter, for example. Now, we would have more iron than before, and more zinc than before, and way more bronze and silver than before, but less gold. He's played about 30 minutes, so he's about where we are if we're starting out right here. This is actually pretty good. We're going to have magnetite, we're going to have limonite, tetrahedrite, and cassiterite. This is a pretty good run of minerals. It's a pretty good, the flux stone gives us steel on site when we have coal. This isn't bad. Where is, it said I had bituminous coal though, and I don't see it listed there. It is there. It's just on another page. Okay, it's on another area. Okay, so we do have it, along with some other stones that I usually don't care about. Okay, it puts it down here. I forgot. There we go. So I like that site. Let's use that. Let's see if we can't get. Actually, that's okay. It's a brook. Food and drinks. We're going to take care of food and drinks very early, and we're going to automate them so you never have to think about them again. I'm a big fan of minimizing the amount of things that the Dwarf Fortress player has to actively watch. We're going to try and do that very early this time out. So I like this. I like this site. It's a little close to the elves for some players, but I like the elves bringing me animals. Don't sweat it, devils. I'll teach you how to navigate to boot. Let's go with this embark. Now, we're going to prepare for the journey carefully. We're going to bring exactly what we want because we're going to get rid of everything on this list, and we're going to actually do it all from scratch. From scratch. Everything gone. Now, some of these things we're going to put back on the list, but for right now, I'm cleaning everything off. Let's start with animals. Animals aren't necessarily the most important thing to bring. I'm just starting there because they're the easiest thing to see on this list. We're going to bring about 5 dogs, females. We're going to bring 2 males. And the reason you'll need to bring 2 males is there's roughly about a 5% chance or 3% chance that they don't have an interest in the opposite sex, and you can't breed them if they don't. You can't make them get the job done. It's not real common, but if you only bring one and you embark repeatedly, sooner or later you're going to have the circumstance occur. Maybe not for your dogs, maybe for one of the other animals, but it will happen. So an extra male will guarantee that you can get your breeding stock off to a run. We're going to take, I'm going to skip the cat this time. I'm not going to bother. I love cats, by the way. I have 2 myself, but we're not going to bring them here. We are going to bring sheep because we know we're going to have grazing area. Dogs allow us to keep our fortress safe by alerting. They also serve as a source of meat and leather and bone to be used for industry. Sheep will serve all those purposes as well as providing wool and milk. Pigs will provide milk, but not the wool, and don't require grazing, so we don't have to keep them in a grass area. Let's see. And lastly, I bring birds. And birds, I prefer blue peahens. I've gone into the discussion of why in great depth on prior streams, but the gist is that the blue peahen hits kind of a good average of eggs and meat and leather and a good, quick maturity rate in 1 year instead of 2. So it kind of hits all the high points I care about for my birds. If I were going to pick other choices, depending on what you want, I'm probably going to look at chickens or turkeys. Turkeys for they get bigger and you get more out of them when you finally butcher them, and they have good large egg clutches. Chickens, if you wanted to go solely for eggs and you wanted your birds to grow up in a year. Cows are expensive. If you don't modify the embark points, a cow costs you 3 times as much as a sheep. 2 cows is huge money, huge embark points. Now, embark points are settable in your world gen settings. You can generate your world and give yourself as many embark points as you want. If you're a new player and you're starting out, create a world, call it your training world. Give yourself 20,000 embark points. Take whatever the hell you want with you. All the food in the world, all the wood in the world, all the stone in the world, all the ore in the world. Make whatever you want. Experiment. Screw around. Have fun. It's a throwaway. When you're done, toss the world out. Create a real world with the normal vanilla settings and see what you get and go for it. Learn how to play on a world where there's no real pressure. Turn off the invaders for a while. Play in a sandbox mode. There's all kinds of ways you can kind of take the load off when you're learning Dwarf Fortress. My first fortress out, literally, I couldn't figure out how to feed the dwarves. They died. They starved. Um, my second fortress out, I literally experimented with farming. I literally went to the wiki, figured out how to farm, did it. And then, literally, as soon as I figured out how to do it, understood how farming worked, wadded it up and threw it all away and started a completely new embark. And I did that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 forts. Each time I went a little further, learned a different, trade, if you will. Figured out what worked, figured out what didn't. Trial and error was very much the name of the game. I'm going to try, to whatever extent I can, to save you folks from some of that. But some of that's going to be inevitable. You're not going to get away with it. Trade the cows. You can. Any animal I bring, I am going to either use or butcher on the spot, pretty much. Might keep a lone animal around in hopes of getting a breeding pair for a while, but most animals, they're not going to live in my fortress. They're going to come, they're going to be rendered into meat and fat and bone and leather, and that's their purpose. That's the nature of their existence. We are not vegetarians, and they are going to be sorry about it. If you can get and train elk birds, then they are great. Cave crocodiles are great, but they're expensive to start with. If you can get them, capture them, and train them, domesticate them, by all means, use them. These are not the best birds, necessarily. They're the best egg layers you can probably take with you, for me, for what I regard as the high points. Cave crocodiles will sometimes lay like 60 eggs or some ridiculous number all at once. Far more productive than any bird you're ever going to bring. Not sure about elk birds. I'd have to look, but cave crocodiles, I think, are the runaway winner in the egg laying category. The catch, of course, is that you have to domesticate cave crocodiles. And that's not an easy feat. So, okay, so Darren, fair warning. It may have mattered in older versions, but currently egg volume I don't believe is actually used. Big eggs, small eggs, doesn't matter. Count only. It is not counted. It is tracked, but it's not used. Unless that's changed very recently. Let me pull the wiki up and double check. Give me a second here. I'm certain I've seen this somewhere, but I won't swear to it if I can't prove it. Bear with me. I thought that... egg production, maybe. Maybe it's the egg production. There it is, right there. Domestic poultry can produce much more food as eggs than the same animal produces as meat, because one egg equals one meat equals one meal. They're always the same. It's tracked. I make no mistake. It's there in the game. I promise you. It does track the difference in egg sizes, but it doesn't actually use it. So count is the big factor when you're talking about an egg industry. That's not to say that elk birds aren't a good choice. You're not always going to have access to cave crocodiles, for example. And like I said, if I had to choose, I'm thinking elk bird's probably a little easier to domesticate than the cave crocodile. A little less limbs missing from your animal trainer. All right, so what is the first thing that you should always bring unless you are doing... Oh, Darren. Oh, Darren. Welcome to Dwarf Fortress. Version 47 means that in Toadie's eyes, the game is 47% feature complete. The first thing you bring is actually not a pickaxe. You can make pickaxes if you want, but there is something that you cannot make unless you bring one. The ultimate chicken or egg is exactly what Darren correctly identifies. If you don't bring an anvil, you can't make anvils. And you'll literally have to import one before you can. There is no way to make an anvil without starting with one. This, of course, begs the question where the first anvil came from. We're not going to answer it tonight. For many purposes, iron and steel are different. That is to say, steel is usually better. But for purposes of literal use as furniture, that is to say, not appraising it as furniture, but literally like sitting on it or, standing on it, for example, there's no real difference. For weapons and armor, and in terms of value, that is to say, beauty, steel is better. But any place where that doesn't matter, iron is just as good. And so iron anvils are better if you could bring them because they're 3 times as cheap. And you get the same use out of them. Now, the next thing I would bring right after that, in most cases, for most fortresses, in the modern version of Dwarf Fortress, are a couple of pickaxes. Now, I would bring copper pickaxes. And say 2 of them. Not a whole lot, just a couple. Just enough to get a couple of guys digging right off the bat, so that you can start excavating the fortress. Now, the next thing I bring is the materials to make more tools. These 4 items... Oh, one more. Gotta have one more. These 5 items. I forgot. Copper is not the best for weapons or armor. It's okay for hammers. It's not very good for edged weapons. But even as a hammer, you're better off with iron or steel, if you can get it, than copper. Doubly so for armor. But if you have nothing else, better the copper than nothing. Better the copper than leather. Better the copper than bone. Silver makes a good hammer too. Platinum if you can get some artifact made, right? But so let's talk for a moment. Malachite, cassiterite, bituminous coal, coke, and gabbro. What the hell am I doing with this? Why am I bringing stone? Well, malachite is an ore of copper, and cassiterite is an ore of tin. Put together, that's bronze. Now, why am I bringing copper and tin and not iron, you might be asking yourself. Well, malachite is 6, and cassiterite is 6, and that's 12 for a total of 8 bars of bronze I'll get out of it for 1 stone combining. If I bring an ore of iron, let's say limonite, because that's easy to remember, right? Limonite is 24 dwarf bucks, and that's twice as much, but I only get half as much ore. So I end up with half as many bars. 4 bars of iron costs twice as much as 8 bars of bronze. We could bring enough bronze early on to equip all of our dwarves well, I don't know about all, but all of our dwarves with bronze weapons, and probably a good chunk of them with bronze armor. We would never be able to do that out of the gate with iron, based on what we bring with us, without doing something really crazy, I don't think. Um, so we'll increase the amount of each of these because you don't want to just bring one of each. You want to bring a few of each. We want to make sure we get several. That way we can make a lot of bronze and not just one chunk of bronze, right? Now, that covers the malachite and the cassiterite. Bituminous coal is made from coal into coke, the next thing on the list. Coke is not a drink here. Coke is a fuel made from carbon. You may have heard of it before, you may not, but it is used as a high-quality fuel for our forges and smelters. If you're going to melt down stones, you're going to need coke or charcoal. Charcoal is made from wood, and coke is made from one of the two types of coal, bituminous coal and lignite. Bituminous coal is the better coal. It's more productive, you get more out of it here. Lignite will work, and it is better than making charcoal, but it's not nearly as good as making bituminous coal into coke. Charcoal is the last path for fuel. You make logs into charcoal, but you only make one log into 1 bar of charcoal, so it's really not all that efficient. It requires a lot of hauling and time. Whereas 1 unit of bituminous coal becomes something like, 4 or 8 units of coke, something like that. It's a really high number. And lignite is half of that, and still more than the charcoal by a fair bit. You'll need 1 unit of fuel, whether that's coke or charcoal, to start our bronze and coal cycle off. So make sure we bring a unit of fuel or something to make it with. Now, normally I bring raw materials whenever possible, so coke is technically a finished product, as is the anvil and the picks. But in the case of all 3 of these, I'm bringing them for speed. I don't want to have to make the coke first. I don't want to have to make the picks first, and I certainly can't wait around to import an anvil. So we're going to bring these things as finished goods to kick our cycle off and get it running quickly. Now you might be asking me, why gabbro? The next thing on the list, the last of the 5. Well, gabbro is a stone, and there's nothing particularly special about gabbro in this case, except that it is magma safe for use later, and, well, it's easy for me to remember, because gabbro is always my bro. Rim shot, please. Alright, so we'll bring a few gabbro stones so that we can build our forges and smelters out of the gate, or make them into blocks, or do something else, whatever we need. In fact, we'll bring a few more than we usually do, because I may do a wagon drop tonight for extra effect. Okay, what else would you bring? Well, how about food? Well, if I was going to bring food, I'd start with fish, maybe some meats. But it's worth noting that in the meat category, not all meat is created equal. There is no difference for purposes of feeding your dwarves. That's right. Gabbro is magma safe, so it's wonderful later. Even if we don't have Gabbro on site, I know I have at least some magma safe stone available to me right away. There is no difference to your dwarves between prepared wolf lung and peregrine falcon meat. They are, for food purposes, equivalent. Now, some dwarves might prefer one over the other, and for that particular dwarf, that's better, because he likes it and gets a kind of a happy thought from it, right? Kind of like The Sims. But, generally speaking, at Embark, you're not catering to your dwarves' tastes. You're laying in salt tack and beef jerky for 6 months' supply. You're going to eat nothing but salt tack and beef jerky so that you can build your fortress and get it productive. Especially for us in this instance, because we're going to be doing something a little different tonight with the micro fort idea. Now, it's worth noting that there's a kind of an exploit here that I do like to take a little bit of advantage of. I don't go crazy with it. I don't go crazy with the exploit, but if you add different types of meat and fish, each different type gets its own barrel, which means that for every different type you bring, you get a different barrel. They don't mix together on Embark. So, for example, without bringing a ton of food, I've brought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of fish. That would get me 8 additional barrels for free. The barrels come along with the food for free. Now, you can really min-max the hell out of this. If you were going to bring 40 foods, instead of bringing 40 of one type of food and getting something like 4 barrels or something like, you could bring 40 different individual 1 unit of food, and you get 40 barrels out of the bargain. Now, you don't have to exploit it that hard. Dwarf Fortress isn't quite that oppressive. But it's worth noting that you can get yourself a little bit of extra material right out of the gate. If we were going to bring 40 food, instead of bringing it all of one type, I could bring 8 different types of food, put 5 in each type, and they all have their own barrels. And as the food is consumed, the empty barrels can be repurposed for other things. So having a few empty barrels around isn't going to hurt us at all. Bang, there's food. Now 40 food is enough for me here because we're not embarking in an area that's hostile to dwarven life. There's going to be plenty of wildlife around in terms of either hunting or fishing or picking plants out of the wilderness. And we're going to hit farming as early as I can get it done. Because getting farming set up makes your farming or your food production pretty much effortless, painless. Now that we've got our food, let's talk drinks. Dwarves do not consume water unless they absolutely have to. Only dwarves in the hospital consume water. Dwarves in the real world want their booze, and they will not drink water unless they are being made very unhappy. Yeah, that's evil terrain, but we're skipping that part. We covered that on the embark part. Alright, so we're going to bring about 15 of each type. That gets us 60 booze. That's a good chunk to get us started. We won't probably need it, and we have plenty of plants around in the wilderness near where we're embarking that we should be able to make more from local source materials if we need to. But having some up front is really, really important because you're not going to want to try and brew booze on the first day if you can avoid it. Your dwarves are going to get thirsty, and you want to make sure you'll have some available for them right away. Bringing 60 means I have a good cushion in case I don't get to brewing the booze right out of the way because they're busy doing other things. What else would I bring? Well, let's look. Seeds. Seeds is an excellent category. Most of the seeds are worth bringing. I would not bring dimple cup, because dimple cup is made only into dye and has no food value to you. You'll use it later to improve clothing and items to make them prettier and more valuable. You'll use those more valuable items to turn around and yarn is not a bad choice, actually. We won't take yarn, probably, or if we do, not very much. We'll probably take silk. Silk thread instead of yarn. Because silk is harder to come by. We're going to have sheep, so we'll be able to shear those for a few units of thread if we needed to. We can make the thread into cloth if we needed cloth. So we'd be able to get access to yarn in a hurry. We're going to bring pigtails, so we'd be able to plant those, and in a season or so, we'll be able to get pigtail fiber pretty quickly. Silk, though, has to be harvested in the caverns, which are potentially hazardous. We can't leave them open all the time and let our dwarves constantly harvest silk. It requires... yeah, the sources are more volatile and lethal. Some silk comes from giant cave spiders capable of biting a dwarf and causing, breathing paralysis. Little cave spiders, maybe they cause a little dizziness momentarily. It's the kind of thing that's a spider, no bigger than the palm of your hand. Giant cave spiders are a different animal entirely, and they are fully capable of eating your dwarves when they come to harvest the silk. Now, why 14? To be honest, I'll probably go up to 15 just for my OCD, but the design that was originally specified to us used a 1x7 farm plot for each little micro fort. We will have sheep to shear. We've got a ewe and a ram right there. Bang, done. I do like to roll with sheep. You can use alpaca or llamas, but they're more expensive. They're twice as expensive as sheep, so sheep is the better choice for me. If you're tweaking your embark points so you can afford to buy things like cows and bulls, because normally you really don't have that kind of points, then maybe you switch over to alpacas and llamas as well. Okay, so we've got seeds. We can plant crops right off the bat. That's good. We'll need to be able to do that. Weapons and training weapons and ammo and anvils, other than for our previous discussion. Leather and cloth, and these are all finished goods. I wouldn't bring finished goods. Wood I might bring, especially if you're going to embark somewhere where it's scarce. If you're embarking in a badlands or a desert or shrublands out there where there's just not a lot of wood around, it doesn't hurt to bring a few logs at the start. If you find yourself trapped with no wood and you really, really need some, you can disassemble your wagon for 3 logs. But if you're embarking in a glacier and 3 logs is all you've got, it's really hard to make beds. go for cavern trees, you can make a tree farm, but it's really, really hard to make beds with no wood. We're embarking in a swamp. We are going to have no problem finding all the wood we need. It will pretty much take over if we let it. We are literally going to have to send dwarves to hack back the green hell periodically, or it will take over our fortress area and cause us problems of its own. So far, so good, guys. No questions? Darren is correct. The mushroom trees in the cavern, or the ones that you farm underground, are less productive than surface trees. And you can get 3 logs out of the wagon. That's correct. You don't have to start off in a forest necessarily, but I would advise starting off with access to a forest. If you want to embark in the mountains because you want a giant waterfall entrance, there's nothing wrong with that. Go for it. But try and arrange it so that your embark has some forested area as well. You can farm in the soil easier, you can cut the trees for lumber easier. It's good to have access to surface wood. It's not required. I'm not going to say that your dwarves will die without it, but it's really useful. Really, really useful. Now, it's good to bring a little stone with you. I like bringing gabbro for its marble safeness. It's worth noting that not all stone is equal. Marble is a flux stone, so it costs more. Hematite and limonite are ores, they cost more. Gold nuggets is technically a stone. You can make things out of it. But it can also be smelted down to gold bars, and so it's costing you 90 points to bring 1 stone of gold. We won't bring any of that with us when we start. Bars are better off, instead of bringing the bar, which is like hugely expensive, bring the ore, even if it's iron. God, don't bring the iron bars, bring the iron ore and make your own bars. 50 points for a bar, 4 bars from a 24-point stone. Cut gems and large gems are things I wouldn't necessarily bring a lot of stone. Bring a little. You might hit an aquifer early, and it's sometimes easier to have stone than it is to try and deal with it. You don't need a lot. 10 or 15 units is more than enough, and it can get expensive if you bring a lot of it. And you'll get a bunch of it once you start mining your fortress out normally. So it's not usually all that valuable. But your first few workshops can be built out of stone, and it being magma safe means you can do things like build wood smelters out of it. If you find yourself in an area where you forgot to bring coke and you need to make fuel, you can make your forges out of it, you can make your smelters, you can make your glass furnaces. In a pinch, you can build magma-safe structures out of it. Gabbro, in this case. Small cut gems, large cut gems, we're not going to use either of those. Well, we're not going to avoid the aquifer today. We're going to take advantage of the aquifer. Now, sand is my fave. I love sand. We have sand on site. We're going to bring 20 units with us. Why am I bringing sand if I have sand on site? Because sand comes with free bags. That's 20 free bags. Bags cost like 10 units of dwarf bucks at Embark. Right out of the gate, to buy an empty bag costs you 10 dwarf bucks. But if I buy that same bag by buying a unit of sand, I get the sand for 1 dwarf buck, and the bag is free. Bring a few bags of sand, even if you're not planning to have a sand industry. Dump the sand out, keep the bags, and you are in business. In particular, rock nuts are planted to make quarry bushes, and quarry bushes have to be harvested into bags. They have to be processed into bags. So you're going to need a few. If you're planning to make anything out of sand long term in large quantity, you are strongly advised to take a few bags with you out of the gate, and you'll be able to start the sand stuff off right away. It's cheap and it's effective. The resulting products are actually fairly valuable too for non-metal products. Glass is something we would make. These are raw gems. They're not like materials. Clay, if you're going to bring a clay, bring fire clay, but I normally don't. Stone blocks you could bring them, but I would rather bring the stone and make the blocks. You get a lot more blocks out of bringing the stone that way. Trap components, bodywear, headwear, handwear, footwear, legwear, shields, cheeses, powders, for most of the powders, are all finished goods that I wouldn't bring. One exception in the powders category, gypsum plaster is hard to come by on most sites. It's used for casts, like when your dwarves break a bone. It's nice to have some available so that your dwarves can make casts, and it's very hard to get on most sites unless you import it. So starting off with a little is not necessarily a bad ad. Your dwarves can usually get by with splints, but why make them struggle? If they can get the plaster and it's not too expensive and you've got the points, I say go for it. Now, that covers powders. Now, extracts. Extracts deserve a special mention because you can kind of cheese them the way we did other stuff. Specifically, you can get milk. Milk is not useful as food out of the gate. Your dwarves don't just eat milk. But milk can be made into cheese, and cheese is a food item. So any milk you bring is 1 unit of milk, comes in a barrel just like the fish did. You can turn right around and make the milk into cheese, and you've got all those empty barrels waiting to be used to store more food or brew booze into. Storage is nice, and you'll get it for free if you have milk. I love bringing the milk. That may very well be true, Darren. I've never really actually researched it. I just prefer to bring gypsum plaster and give them access to it. I assume that there is a better value to it. Whether it's actually implemented or not, I assume that's intended. So I'm just going to operate as though it is. It's not really all that expensive to pick up a few bags of gypsum plaster at Embark. We can always order more, and we will, but at the same time, it's not hard to bring some with us and get, on top of it, so to speak, from the get-go. Milk is dirt cheap. Every unit of milk here can be used to make cheese and free up a huge number of barrels for us right out of the gate. This is like bringing sand only for food storage instead of sand storage. Now, in addition to all of those, I would look at bringing... let's see here. Let's go down the list again. So most of the other extracts are not worth it. Blood is only useful if you're dumping it out. Venom is only useful if you're dumping it out. Syrup does have a use, but it's hard to get the dwarves to use it properly, and it's expensive, and you can make it on site. Ichor and venom and blood are only useful for dumping to get the empty barrel, and if you're going to do that, you might as well bring the milk, use the milk, get the empty barrel anyway, and have the cheese to boot. There's no value in bringing these other extracts. Crafts, toys, instruments, tools, cages, barrels, buckets, cups, mugs, goblets, flasks and water skins, quivers and backpacks and bags, all finished goods. Don't bring them. Thread. Thread deserves a moment. Thread is not technically a finished good. It's kind of an intermediate good. You weave webs into silk thread, or you process pigtails into plant thread. But at the same time, thread is something I would bring, because thread is cheaper than cloth. A unit of thread makes a unit of cloth. Bringing 5 units of thread gives us access to 5 units of silk cloth right out of the gate that we don't have to go harvest. It also gives us access to thread in case our hospital needs to stitch up some wounds. Now, we'll want to move away from silk thread for bulk purposes as fast as possible. We'll hope to move to something like rope reeds or whipvines, where we can make our cloth out of something other than pigtails. Pigtails are fine, but they only grow 2 seasons a year, and surface crops grow in 4. So you can have much more thread coming out of your plants if they are surface crops. Silk thread, however, is hard to come by at the beginning, and it's cheaper to bring the thread than cloth or the finished goods. So if you need to make something out of thread, whether for a mood or for some other purpose, silk thread is harder to come by. It's a better choice to bring right out of the gate. Now, we've done that, so let's see, that's our thread. Sheets are like paper sheets. You don't bring those unless you make them on site. Ropes, splints, crutches, and miscellaneous are all finished goods. I wouldn't bring them, with one exception, possibly for charcoal to get your fuel cycle started if for some reason your fortress doesn't know what coke is. I can't think that I've ever heard them not know what coke is, but hey, it could happen. And if it does, charcoal is your alternative. And that's everything. We've brought the works. We've brought everything, in the items list I would want to bring. We might go back and change counts, or maybe we'll add some stuff for flair, but that's the vital items and animals. Now, you might be saying we have 400 points down here, and that's true. we have to configure our dwarves, and that comes out of your embark point budget as well. Now, out of the gate for us, I want 2 really high-skilled miners, because these guys are going to be miners full-time. That's going to be their permanent gig. And they're going to pick up those 2 picks on day 1 and never let go of them again, basically. We're gonna have them mining constantly. Now, we're going to bring, in this case, let me think about this for a minute. We're embarking in the swamps. We'll have plenty of access to food if we need it. We're talking about doing the micro forts, so we're not as pressured to have a single farmer. We're going to have farming on a lot of people. They'll do their own farming in their own areas. So we may not bring some of the things we would normally have brought. We do want to bring a weaponsmith. We're going to use our bronze to make some things right out of the gate. We will bring a glass maker, because we do intend to make glass items en masse, early from fuel and later with magma. And glass is, like I said, it's an infinite resource that's fairly versatile and reasonably valuable. So it makes a great choice for bulking out your furniture, for example. 2 miners and a smith for ours is essential. You don't necessarily require the miners. If you're going to do something crazy like I've done in the past, for example, where I don't dig right off the bat necessarily. It's not that I'm not going to dig. I do make picks and I do dig, but instead of trying to dig right out of the gate, we bring or make battle axes, cut a bunch of trees down, and we basically build a log cabin with a ceiling door, and then we just seal ourselves up inside that log cabin, and we're effectively underground. We can then take our time making picks and other things and dig down from our bunker. You don't actually have to have the miners, but I want my miners to hit the ground running on day 1 and start excavating my shaft. I want maximum digging as fast as possible. So, miners. Now, I'm going to take an engraver. We could train one, and an engraver doesn't actually give us much in terms of fortress, in terms of raw fortress effectiveness. Welcome back, Jimmy Tibby. But we'll use him for recording our fortress's history eventually, and early on we'll use him to create value in certain rooms where value matters by smoothing the rough cave surface out to smooth blocks. Cheers, Diamond. Alright, so we've got our engraver. Let's get a carpenter. And you might not want a carpenter, but it's worth noting that there are certain things that can only be made out of wood. You can make barrels out of metal. You can make rock pots or glass pots. You can make most furniture out of glass or metal or stone. But beds cannot be made from anything but wood normally. So if you want to have beds, you got to have wood, and that means a carpenter. Now, you can get by without a carpenter. All dwarves can do all jobs to a basic level of competence. There's no such thing as a failed job with a dwarf. Dwarves never have an inferior product unless you count normal as inferior. Dwarves do, but, just saying. Taking a carpenter allows us to guarantee that we have a high-skilled crafter making the one piece of item out of furniture or out of wood that every dwarf in the fortress is going to touch. Every dwarf uses a bed. All beds are made of wood. Your carpenter touches every dwarf. Maybe you get lucky and you get a better skilled carpenter later, but I wouldn't count on it. Skilling him up means making lots and lots of bins, and we will certainly do that, but it'll take a while. Well, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you have to have a carpenter. You don't have to take any dwarven skills at all. People certainly embark with nothing. 7 dwarven peasants with no gear and no nothing arrive with an empty wagon and 2 draft animals and proceed to conquer the wilderness. Is a thing. It means they survive on the wilderness and they kind of idle around for 4 months or 6 months or 8 months until the caravan shows up, or until they find somebody whose stuff they can steal. But then they can start cutting trees and, getting to work. But beyond that, people have embarked that way and survived. You don't require any of these things, but they make your life easier. They have an impact. And I try to bring the things that I think have the best in a sense, weight to value ratio, if you will. What you're getting for what you're paying is the maximum value you can get without getting crazy into the min-maxing. Like I said, I didn't bring 40 different types of meat and fish. I only brought 8. That's correct. This is a good way to start off. It's a solid way to start off. It may not necessarily even be the best way, but it's a solid and reliable way to start off. If you're embarking in evil terrain, we've already got the anvil. That's the first thing I brought. That was the first question I asked the group. I asked, what is the one thing that you must bring if you want to have it before the trade, before the caravan arrives? Have to bring an anvil. Have to. Iron if you can get it, steel if you can't, but you really need an anvil. No metalworking without it. No metalworking, no making tools. No making tools, you better have them with you. So, having done that, we've got our carpenter, our engraver, our glassmaker, our weaponsmith, and our 2 miners. Let's take stonecrafter might be nice for making mugs, but we can make those out of glass. Could bring an armor smith, I suppose. I could take a mason and make certain things out of stone, but we're going to make a lot of stuff. We're going to make as much stuff as possible out of glass. Take a mechanic and we can do the wagon drop thing again faster, but I'm not really super. We're in a swamp. We're going to have plenty of wood to work with. Pickaxes are incredibly useful, but they're not necessarily essential if you can make them. And if you're willing to survive on the surface without them, you can get by without them for a while. I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. Like I said, what I'm bringing here is this. This is what I bring is not only a good solid setup for new players to think about, but this is basically what I embark with. This is how I do it normally, unless I'm doing something for a challenge or something. You know, the skills might vary. The animals and the items almost never vary. This is basically almost always exactly what I'm going to bring. What type of dwarves I start with might change, but and then maybe I change items based on that sometimes, but not usually all that much. These are, with the possible exception of the engraver, like I said, we're using him for value creation in a very specific way. He's not super useful to a new player. For new players, you might want to lose the glassmaker and take a mason instead, because stone is easier to get than glass. But I'll show you how we're gonna have abundant availability of glass if we want it. It's not going to be hard for us, and it's not hard for a new player if you follow along. What to bring? Okay, so we'll do this. We'll make him an armor smith, and then we'll spend his last 5 points on making him a grower. So we've got a grower in the fortress to build our initial farming area if we need to. Now, the catch here is that he's going to get drafted into the armor smith guild, along with our weaponsmith and maybe some others. We'll see. And he's going to spend his days in a very confined area doing his growing. A mace dwarf? Why a mace dwarf? I'm just curious. Why not an axe dwarf or a sword dwarf or spear dwarf? I guess why maces specifically, you understand? I mean, it's not why a mace dwarf, but yeah, miscellaneous object user. We're gonna bring somebody who's a high value student. Fluid engineering, optical engineering. That's a valid reason. I do like warhammers in my fortress over maces, generally speaking. Call them dwarfy, but I like them. Though we go with warhammers generally. But yes, if I was going to take dwarves at the beginning, warhammers would be a good choice. However, for point value, for raw sheer effectiveness in terms of what you get, if you're not sure you're going to be up against the undead, I would take axemen instead. You're going to create or have axes very quickly by virtue of needing to cut trees normally. And so having axes available and people who know how to use them means you don't have to make a second kind of weapon to be effective out of the gate. In fact, if you embark and you have axemen and you have an axe in the wagon, you effectively have a starter militia right there and there, ready to go. That's not to say you're wrong, however. Blunt weapons are probably generally more effective against the undead long term. Okay, we've still got a ton of points though. What are we going to do here? Well, let's scatter around. So we're going to have a guild for our ceramics guys. So let's make our starting 7 the providers for their little groups. Okay? These guys are also their own farmers, right? So, oops, not herbalist, but brewer and cook. And then we'll go back over here and get this guy. We'll do him as a grower and a brewer and a cook. Now, these aren't necessarily the most effective ways to spend our points, but since we're going to try out the micro fort design tonight, doing it this way gives us the ability to kind of spread out our guys here. We'll do the miners and the engravers in one guild. So all of our starting 7 here will end up with growing and brewing and cooking, even though we're not doing those for them full time. And we'll leave those jobs on for them this time out so that what I've found, Darren, is that bronze axes will actually do reasonably well against most armor you're going to find, even up to iron armor. Enemies don't come with steel normally. They only come with iron. And bronze, while not as effective as iron or steel against iron, is effective enough to not be reckless as a partially armored enemy. While there is armor on the goblins when they arrive, most of it is just leather, and bronze will go right through that just as easily as iron, no problem. The few pieces of armor that they have tend to be copper and bronze rather than iron, because iron is top tier for goblins and elves and humans. Steel or adamantine is top tier for us. So while it's not the perfect weapon material, if you're making your weapons out of bronze initially, while you're correct that blunt weapons are more effective against armor and undead, if you're pressed for time, you're going to be faster with the axes. So it's a question of where you're embarking. If you're embarking in an evil area, I might seriously consider the axes for speed, because you can start immediately and have them up. Now, if you're embarking with mace men and you have time to make maces, or you're embarking with mace men and you have time to, or you have the points to embark with maces, keep in mind, we're spending all these, let's call them bonus points, on skills that are bonus skills that I normally wouldn't take with my dwarves. I normally would have added more stuff. But I'm looking through here and I'm trying to think what we would normally take that I've missed, because I feel like I've got so many points that I normally wouldn't have had. We brought drinks, right? And food, and an anvil, and picks. Bronze to make axes and weapons, and armor. No, I'm not bringing mugs. We'll make those. We've got extra gabbro if we want to make mugs. Or sand we can make into goblets, right? I mean, so we don't need to bring mugs. And I appreciate the joke suggestion for miscellaneous object user, but I'm trying to think what I would normally bring that I haven't brought. Welcome, Dwarf. And for you new guys who've been joining us, as we go along, if you have any questions, half the purpose of the stream, not that I'm aware of, Cuglorf, it's a joke suggestion. But as we're going along, remember, you new folks, your questions are half the purpose of the stream. Answering them is half the reason I'm here. The other half, of course, is that we're raising money for sick kids down here in the corner. If you have questions as we go along, don't hesitate to stop me. Don't hesitate to ask. I don't care how silly you think they may be. I will happily explain anything and everything I'm doing to you in the hopes that what I'm imparting will be useful to you when you go to play Dwarf Fortress for yourselves. Alright, so 8 points left. What did we forget, guys? What are we not bringing? What are we missing here? I don't want to bring cloth. Normally I would have brought some logs, I guess, but we're going to embark with some trees all around us and make axes pretty quick. I mean, a few logs wouldn't hurt to keep our carpenter busy, like right out of the gate, but I only get 2 for that many points. It's not like it's really valuable. No, if I was going to bring mugs, we'll bring additional stone and we'll make the mugs. We'll make them out of gabbro. Gabbro mugs. Gabbro is your bro. In fact, we'll back one of those off. We'll take 11 gabbro and put 5 more sand in the wagon because sand is grand. No, I've got dogs. We don't bring war dogs. I don't bring trained dogs. I'll train them on site. It's cheaper. I don't bring juvenile animals because you have to wait for them to grow up and they cost the same. Alright, so what's our fortress name tonight? Because we're going to do this Cobalt Ivory. Okay, that works. What's our group? Group is the Crested Trumpets. We have bags. We bought the bags. Can you spot them, Diamond? You see where I've got them? Right there. Sand. A bag will cost you 10 dwarf bucks. If you bring a unit of sand, you get the bag for free. That's a 10-fold savings for bags, if you're just bringing the bags. Now, we're actually going to use the sand, so this is like even better for us, because we're using the sand instead of dumping it. But you can take bags of sand, dump the sand, keep the bag, free bag. Basically. I mean, you still got to pay for the sand, but let's be honest. Psh. Technically, we'll also have bags for our gypsum plaster as well, but I don't want to dump that. That's valuable to us. The seeds would come in bags as well, but again, don't want to dump the seeds. Take a look, guys. Anything you can think of. I'm all ears. Because I can't think of it. I really can't. I'll get a wheelbarrow for the Kia to steal. That's right. Damn Kia. Okay, so I do need to set this guy's points a little differently because we said we weren't going to have like a main grower this time. We're going to have like the split group thing here going. Okay. Wheelbarrow I'd make out of logs. We've got enough points to buy the logs if we want. Or we could cut them out of the trees and make logs and make the wheelbarrow right away. We're going to have a carpenter, so no problem initially getting those logs ground down if we wanted to. 3 logs means I could use my logs instead of disassembling the wagon and have logs right out of the gate. Anything else you guys think you'd bring? If not, we'll go with more sand. Since we're not buying as many logs this time out, I've got a lot more points to spend than I normally would. No. I didn't mean my only neighbors were elves. But we're like literally a stone's throw from the nearest elven settlement. Like 2 world tiles. 2 local region tiles. You know what I'm saying? If this were a practical matter, the elves would be looking at us and going, hey, dude, you're kind of encroaching on our borders there a little bit. if this was total war, they'd be complaining that we were a great power right on their border, you know? Now, I think we have humans and elves and goblins, and I'm not sure if we have kobolds. I'd have to look. Okay. Off we go then, guys. Let's embark.
This will be our new home.
And there are wolfmen. Who doesn't love wolfmen? Now, wolfmen are not the same thing as were animals. Wolfmen are like literal animal men. They're not hybrid transformers that come out on the moon. They literally are wolfmen all the time. Probably don't want to be eaten by wolfmen, so we should probably think about doing something about that. Alright, let's pause the game right out of there. Let's zoom out here and take a look at the world. Now, for you new players who haven't done a lot of embarking, this is my embark zoomed way out. Now, if you look real close, we're going to zoom out here a bit, away from the world in a sense, as we crawl away from the world towards the sky. Now, imagine, if you will, that we're looking down from above, okay? We're floating up here in the clouds, and we're looking straight down on the ground, okay? Because it's basically what we're doing. What you're seeing here are the tips of the trees. And Dwarf Fortress only shows us a couple levels at a time, so the tips of the trees is all we can see at the moment. Now, as I zoom lower and lower, as we zoom closer and closer to the ground, more of the trees comes into focus, more of the trees comes into focus, until eventually you start to see the trunks of the trees and the branches of the trees mixed in here. And then as we get further down, eventually the ground starts to come into view down below the trees. And then now you can start to make out our wagon and our dwarves down here below the trees, the brook. And as we get lower, you can make out the ponds. And now we're down to just above ground level, and it's just the trunks of the trees now, with the brook and the ponds. Now, I'm going to take a minute, and we're going to zoom back out for a moment. Okay, stop for a second. You kind of see how this entire world area here is divided up, if you will, into 4x4 chunks. You can almost see the line going across right here. See it? Right there. And right here. And then right here. Nice 4x4 chunks. It's a little more visible at certain levels of the canopy where it really splits it up. Okay? Now, that's important for us to know because it's going to impact our geography. You can actually see it kind of here. If you look really close, you can see the lines here as well. They're kind of harder to make out, but they're there. They're just more subtle. Now, why does that matter? Okay, so I've paused the game here for a moment, and I'm going to turn off the Fog of War underground for a moment so I can kind of teach you a little bit about Dwarf Fortress geology. Now, I don't normally play with Reveal on. I don't really like it. I like the Fog of War, and frankly, there's certain things that Reveal kind of screws with in your gameplay, so I don't recommend it in any case. But for learning about how Dwarf Fortress lays out its underground layers, I think it's really, really useful for new players. So, now we're below the surface. We're standing as though the surface were just above our heads. We're at Z level -1, just below ground. And this is sand or soil. I don't know which kind, and I'm not looking. I don't really want to spoil myself, as it will, but I'm trying to show you this. Now, you can see here there's a difference, this dividing line between these two types of minerals. It's probable that these are two different biomes. So there may be differing materials in certain layers as we go down right along that line. And that line will carry pretty much vertically into the ground. More soil, only this time the brown spots here are tree roots, and the tree roots are gone. All almost uniform, but there's still, you can see, one type of soil here and a different kind there, the redness. And as we get down further, now we get into stone. And stone looks kind of like this most of the time. There are clusters of stone and veins of stone, and then there are gems in little tiny clusters buried throughout. Now, these stones could be ores, or they could be just other types of stone, but you'll notice that there are 16 of them arranged in a 4x4 grid. That same biome thing is going on down here in the stone as well. Each world gen tile has its own clusters and veins divided into its sections. Now, it's important to know about that because when you start digging probe staircases and you start to mine out tunnels to look for ore, you can kind of imagine how you would do it if all your veins are laid out roughly in these kinds of patterns where there's always a box around them in that sense, yes? So that you always know that in each box, if there's a vein, it's going to be inside that box, yes? So that you can predict where to look for a vein. Not which vein you're getting, not which ore it is, but where to look for ore. And as we go down, the stone clusters are different, and some of them might be ore or not. And there's these vein types are different. Some are coal or tin or iron or whatever. Further and further down, different types of stone, different types of ore, and then we start to hit the caverns. You can see the water here. This is a lake underground. A cavern here, caverns here, cavern here, cavern over there with mushroom tree right there. More water down here at the bottom. And as we dive further in, the cavern is covered over by stone here, and now we're on the level of the cavern where it connects, and then further down there's more connections, and then we start to go below the caverns, and now we're between two cavern layers. And now there's another layer of caverns. And then we go below that layer, and there's and see here we've got a cavern like shaft that connects this layer of caverns to the layer below. Straight down, just a plummeting shaft, like a magma pipe that's no longer full of magma. And here's that lower level of caverns that it's connecting to, and it finally fails out here, and the box here is a spoiler area I won't go into right now. Further down into the stone, further down. Now it's solid. You'll notice there's no veins in this section. We're down into a different type of stone that doesn't have ore veins, but you can still see the gem clusters buried in it. Further down, clusters here. This is probably microcline, judging by the light blue color. It's just a stone, nothing fancy or special about it. These blue veins are probably cobaltite, which is a dark blue ore. It's technically an ore of cobalt, but dwarves can't smelt cobalt, so we'd never make bars out of it. Now we're down below the level of the final caverns, below the level of the final stone. We're getting down to the level of the magma sea at the bottom of the world. And there's magma coming up, and it's getting broader and broader and broader. And finally, this reddish stone here is semi-molten rock. At the bottom of the world, semi-molten rock forms a barrier between the mortal world and the underworld. As it gets fuller and fuller, you see it fills up the world, and now there's nowhere for us to go dive through except through the semi-molten rock. And the only way to go through semi-molten rock is in the spoiler areas, which we're not going to cover right now. And then we dive down further and further and further and further and further and further, and then below the semi-molten rock is spoilers, which I won't go into now. But suffice to say, you don't want to do that before you're ready. You don't want to be down there until you're ready for it. The magma sea is comparatively safe, but below that, well, yikes. So let's go back up top. We're not really interested in looking at our world in that way. I just want to show folks the geology of Dwarf Fortress, how it's laid out, so you know where to dig in order to keep your mining to a minimum. Yes, that's right, fun with the exclamation points. You forgot the exclamation points. It's not just fun, it's fun. Typically because it's on fire, and that's how Dwarf Fortress represents fire. Alright, so let's turn off reveal because I don't want to play with it on. I do not recommend playing with your game on reveal. You can, but I don't recommend it. It can cause problems. Looking at your world if you want, pause the game, take reveal, look at it, you're good. If you're curious about the spoilers, kids, you can always jump out to the Dwarf Fortress wiki and you can probably put spoilers into the search box and it'll probably take you right to them. We won't get there probably on this fort. Maybe, but probably not. I'm probably not going to cover them except in very, very indirect detail. So, now we're ready to embark properly. We've looked at the world. We understand what we're getting ourselves into. Let's talk about our terrain features here for a moment. Trees can be potentially dangerous when the cut logs crash down on things. The brook is actually fairly safe. Although it is technically deep water underneath, the surface of a brook acts like a floor, and so the dwarves can literally walk across this brook with no effort. Okay? All good. Now, we can use that brook's water for all sorts of shenanigans. It's an abundant water source right there on the surface, so gravity can be used to put it where we want it. Really useful to have water on the surface. Not essential. We'll have an aquifer as well that we'll have to deal with. These ponds are worth noting because it is possible for them to freeze in the winter depending on how tropical we are here. I didn't check the temperature before we embarked, I probably should have, but if it freezes in the winter, then the ponds can freeze over. If a dwarf is walking on a frozen pond come spring, well, the pond instantaneously melts, the dwarf plummets to the bottom of the pond, it blasts all the air out of his lungs when he smashes into the bottom of it, and then if you're real lucky, he swims to the edge and climbs out, but usually he drowns. So you don't want your dwarves traveling over the ponds if you can avoid it. Depth greater than 3. Depth of 4 to 7 is dangerous, potentially, to your dwarves. Depth 3 is shallow enough they'll walk through it, no problem. Depth 7 means that tile is full of water. Now, these 7s we're seeing here are actually on the level below, so this is like a basin of dirt full of water. And then we're seeing it from above here. Now keep that perspective in mind, because the rest of the game is played through that perspective. We're always looking down at the world, and we're always looking at a slice, or potentially through the open space in a slice down to the slices below. But slices, always slices, referred to in Dwarf Fortress as Z levels, as in zebra, for the Z coordinate, as in up and down. Okay, so we've talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. Let's get to it. First things first. Although we can't actually do it yet, I want to designate a lot of trees around us for removal. Layers on a cake, or floors in a skyscraper, or layers in that funky mixed drink that's got 7 different layers in it. Now these trees are designated for cutting, and our dwarves would need an axe to actually do that, and we don't have an axe. So, we need to get one. And the way we get an axe is we make it. First things first, we need a smelter. We build a smelter. A smelter will allow us to melt down that bronze and coke to make fuel. We're going to make that out of gabbro, not our coke, because we need the coke for later. You can even do, if you want, multiple smelters to speed this process along. There's nothing wrong with that. You're going to need to make one forge, that's a workshop. And that will use up your anvil and one of the bits of gabbro. Now that we've done that, we've got our smelter and our forge designated, but we're missing a couple of things. Remember, I didn't bring all the skills that dwarves need with me. I took a very specific set with the intent that I would assign unskilled dwarves to things that I don't have out of the gate. When we embark, When we embark initially, and we don't have all those skills, several of them are going to be of particular use to our dwarves. For us, masonry, furnace operation, and architecture. But we don't want our miners doing them. And the reason is we're going to send these guys to get mining, and the other guys are going to be busy cutting trees or making wood objects or running the furnaces or making weapons, depending on what they're doing. Specifically, we need to make sure that our what would usually be our grower here, our weaponsmith, is not set to furnace operation, because we don't want him operating the furnace. I don't care if he does a few masonry tasks. He's not going to do very many for right now. But the furnace operation will stick him a long time smelting ores when we want him making weapons. So now we'll set them all loose, and they will put the stone into the forges and smelters and get us a metalworking industry right out of the gate. Bang! Done. Day 1, metalworking. Not technically. We may get day 2 because they may not actually finish it on day 1. And that one's done, and that one's done. Okay, so now we immediately pause the game, we go back in here, we add a task. And the first task we add is always the coke from bituminous coal. Always, 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 always. You put it on repeat. Don't ever think about it again. Then turn around and add another one. And put it on repeat. And then add make bronze bars. Also on repeat. After the first one kicks off and is done, do the same thing on any other smelters you have. You'll need that first job to finish so that you have enough coke to run the other smelters, because you only brought the 1 bar with you, and you need to use that coke to run them just like you need coke to run these. By doing this, you're going to burn through the coke faster, or you're going to burn through the coal faster making coke, which will give you an abundance of fuel right away. And then anything that needs fuel will have the fuel available. That includes the forge here in a minute, but also these bronze bars. This one job additional like that will help you prevent running dry on coke because you started things off a little too early and weren't paying attention to how much you had. That's all it takes. And he'll bring the coke and then the unit of coal, and bang, he's off to the races. And as soon as he does that and walks away, we will immediately start more jobs. Now, let's get our miners working while we're at it. We need to think about this one for a minute, but we're going to. We're going to embark that wagon right there. I'm not going to do a wagon drop tonight. Let's do the stairs right here. Now, we are going to, just as always, have a central core of a 3x3 staircase to allow for quick and easy transit, no matter where a dwarf is in our fortress, like a central subway tram that goes up and down in our world, just an elevator, if you will. Then we were seriously talking about doing micro fort, and we're going to go down a couple of levels. This should still be sand or soil, I think. We'll find out pretty quick. And then this would be where we'll do our little micro fort. And what I originally thought what we'd do is put our... I need to mine this back at least that far. Oops. Mine that back at least that far to allow for the possibility that we have to wall off the aquifer. Oh, Diamond, hey, feel free to tune back into any of the prior broadcasts that are still out here. And if you'd like, there's a link, I think the link is down there below, where I link out to the YouTube channel where I post the videos once Twitch has gone through with them. You can always tune into a prior broadcast, and I'm happy to answer questions anytime when I'm streaming. But I only do it once a year to raise money for sick kids. Well, 1 month and a week a year. 37 days of Dwarf. We've got about another hour tonight, then we're going to knock off for tonight. But I may stream something else for a bit tonight. We'll see. But I've been running like 5 hours at a go on Dwarf Fortress nightly for a while now, so I need to kind of back it down just a hair. Okay, let's let our miners get started. They've got their job. We're going to check to make sure that this is sand first before I do that. Actually, let's do that. Let's make sure that this is actually what we want it to be before we start chunking it out. Get our miners running. They'll pick up their picks and get started. And now this guy's done his first job, so now we can kick the other smelter off as well. And as before, start with the coke. Now on the second one, as long as that first one kicks off, we'll already have an overabundance of fuel. They don't have to be back-to-back on the coke. We can get to work making the bronze faster. But I want each of them to have 2, so that we burn the coke out and you have plenty of fuel laying around, because the forge guy is not going to make his own coke. So they have to be making enough not only for themselves, but also for him. You get multiple bars out of each reaction, so it's not like it's a pinch, but it's something to be aware of. Alright, now he should be making bronze at this point, and you can always use the T key to peek inside your workshops and see what's there. He's tasked the cassiterite, meaning that the next job is going to use that up. Now I happen to know that's the tin ore, so I know he's making our bronze now, our first bronze. We're going to have metal on day 20 or 21, and then we'll have weapons rolling off the line on day 21 or 22, depending on how fast he gets this done. How fast our weaponsmith gets over here and gets his part done. Alright, looks like day 22, maybe even day 23. Not terrible, but not great. Now we want to query this, not T it. That was kind of silly. We'll add a task to make a weapon made out of bronze called a pick, because we're going to use a lot of picks before we're done. We brought 2. That gives us all 7 of our dwarves having picks. We're also going to make bronze battle axes so that we can have our guys cut some wood for us, and we will have additional fuel in the event that for some reason we use up all of our coke here and don't realize we did it somehow. Our weaponsmith immediately goes to work. We've got 3 guys now making either metal or metal implements, and 2 guys downstairs mining. As soon as those picks roll off, we'll get, or those picks or battle axes roll off, we can get the other guys doing their part as well. We're hoping we'll hit the cavern here fairly early. Give me 1 second, guys. I need to do one thing real fast here. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Here we are. Now then, let's keep going down here and see if they hit the caverns by level 15 or not. Starting to think we're going to have to turn on the Dwarven radar. And now we have one of our guys cutting trees for us. Hopefully not hitting anyone in the process, but, well, we got to take our chances. Well, I'll bet we hit something down here somewhere. Let's find it. Okay, at this point, they are really deep. 43 levels down. That's a long way. And we haven't hit the cavern yet. That's a little unusual. It's possible that our core central staircase here actually descends directly through a rock column, and therefore we have missed one or more caverns on the way down. To try to detect this, we will use Dwarven radar. When you build a farm plot, you'll notice that it tells you when there's available soil. It turns colors. It'll turn purple if you're doing something like this, or green if there's nothing that really obstructs it. We can use that as we zoom down through the ground to try and locate soil in the caverns. There is definitely a cavern with soil at level negative 33. So we've definitely missed at least one cavern on the way down. There's another one at 24, so there's a good chance there's a cavern around that level as well. Okay, so Dwarven radar says somewhere around 23-24 before we hit our first cavern. And then we'll cut a fortification right in that last chunk there to get access to the caverns visible. Now that we've got all this wood laid around, let's get our carpenter working. Cages are useful, maybe not this many quite this early on, but a few cages are useful early on as trap components to trap your enemies or to help transport large numbers of animals at once. Move them all into the cage, move the cage one time, release them all from the cage. All right, so now we've got our carpenter off and running. The tree cutters are about to finish up. Let's let them get their job done here. We've no idlers, so everybody's working right now. We're going to make a few of these early on. They're not necessarily essential this early, but we've got all this wood laying around. We might as well make them right now. We've got it sitting right next to the carpenter's workshop. Kind of screwed this up because I really wanted to be able to do 4 of these, and my wagon is occupying the spot the wrong way because I'm too close to it. And the workshops I've built are in the way, so now I have to get rid of them to put this in. Not really ideal. Okay. Okay, we're going to put the first catch-all here. A handful of shields early in case we have to defend ourselves. this stockpile handles everything. It's basically meant to be a catch-all. We won't use it long term, but for right now I want to pull everything out of the wagon and get it below down. So, regardless of what it is, if it's not wood or stone, I probably want it here. Now there are some of these like corpses and refuse, that's garbage and things that rot, you don't want those. Furniture is loose items that have not yet been built into place, so cabinets and chests, but also barrels and pots. For right now, I don't want those things stored here. I want to get the things that are super valuable below ground, and then we can worry about proper furniture storage later. This hall will double as our dormitory and our hospital initially. Got the carpenter making beds. It's time to put them in so we can have our folks getting into a place to sleep. Wow. Our staircase goes straight through to the semi-molten rock. We did not touch a cavern at any point. We went straight through rock columns at every point we could possibly have intersected a cavern. I don't remember where the caverns are, so we're going to have to find them again, because otherwise I'm likely to run into them when I build the fortress. That's bad. So, we'll let these guys get these stuff dug out for us. We really need it dug out. Well then is right. That does happen periodically. I do like it in a sense that it's really nice to have one contiguous staircase with no side-to-side travel time. The catch is that's not super important for the kind of fortress we're going to build this time. Okay, and there's a cavern. Probably not where I thought it was going to be, though, so oops. But there we go. We can cancel all the other jobs for now. We don't need them. And we can build ourselves a wall. Use a couple of stones of gabbro, and we should be able to convince our dwarves to stand inside the wall when they build it, and that will get this wall back up. We hope, we hope, we hope. Come on, dwarf, do it right.
No.
Blocking sight. There it goes. He moved it. Now, since he moved the gem, now we can actually finish the wall. This is one of those cases where dwarves will allow a crushed butterfly to block a job. Come on, dude. Get down here and do it. I don't care who it is. Absolutely vital we get this sealed up as fast as possible. Come on. Didn't cancel it again, did we? Nope. It's inactive. Nobody's picked it up yet. Come on. It's all the hauling. They're doing all the hauling right now. will make sure it gets done now because, well, I need somebody to do it now. There we go. Now that it's done, he can go back to hauling. Well then, now what are we going to do, right? Well, first off, we've got our nice room going in up here. We should. So let's let them get that finished because we need that now. Need a place to put the beds. Need a place to put some boxes and store our medical supplies. Start getting our well up. Now this needs beds. So, I will admit, time has passed. It's 3 months in now, right? So, obviously, there's time for news to have spread that we're building something here. But when you stop to look at what we've actually got, we literally have a hole in the ground with a wagon in 3 months. Who in their right mind would ever visit a dwarf fortress in the first 3 months of its existence? The time it takes to construct one of these is months at best, right? I mean, hell, we'd barely get a wooden tavern up in that time. All right, so let's now think about a micro fort. Just started. I'm thinking we can put doors in these corners on the usual circle, then either use these as public space or something else, but as long as I separate them out by this much, I don't necessarily need the circle. I can, connect them with a diagonal hallway or whatever. You can use these areas to build the forts and still have transits between them if I need to do something between them, like a well or plumbing. This space would allow for 9 workshops of a particular type with stockpiles above and below. Guild Hall, Tavern, Temple. Now I'm curious, Clindev, do you do local taverns and then one big one, or do you do just the local ones, or? And then we need to do bedrooms as well. There's another way we could be doing all of this. Yeah, that's the other thing I meant to ask you, Clindev. How large are the forts you're running? Sorting everyone for 200 dwarves into separate guilds implies a lot of separate guilds, even if you're combining a few of them. Can't really get at those rooms below the semi-molten rock just yet, can we? Probably shouldn't bother with them. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Once you start getting a fairly large guild hall, you start having to think about the bedroom arrangement just by virtue of. Interesting. Okay. So I seem to remember that in Rome they had. I don't know that I'd call them villas, but they were like little storefront buildings. Yeah, they're little storefront buildings that people would own and then like live above or behind. You'd have a warehouse and production floor on the lower level, and then you'd have your family up above. You can see some of that stuff in like the Midwestern towns having their little two-story downtowns where the lower floor was storefront and the upper floor was family dwelling. But it occurs to me that in the dwarven civilization we're talking about, we can implement our micro forts by using the center space for all the workshops and the stockpiles, and then arranging the living quarters for those people who use those items on that same floor. So, for example, let's say we go down here to the hospital. We would want to station our doctors in rooms on this floor so that if they're sleeping, they're nearby. And then we're going to have them growing their own food and brewing their own booze, so they're going to have kitchens and all that here. Dining rooms and the whole 9 yards, in theory. That's a micro fort. See, I'm thinking here, and I'm thinking, Clinidev, since we are going to be far more vertical than the Romans or the Greeks could ever consider, we can literally use instead of a central courtyard as such and communal kitchens, we can use the center space for all the stockpiles and all the workshops. And they can be above one another then, so for easy transit between floors to get to materials. And then for all the people who actually use that floor, if you're a metalsmith and you're working on the metalsmithing floor, we'll have a wing off of there where your bedroom is, and your kitchen, and your brewing still, and your plant crops, and your tavern, your temple. Effectively, that you would only visit another floor if you were collecting raw materials from their stockpile. Should be possible. We might have to combine a few floors, and that would actually work in our favor because you're going to get things like stone crafters and masons and mechanics who all use mostly rock materials, although you could put the mechanics in with the metalsmiths, I suppose, if you really wanted to. Your engravers and your miners may be together, but you're going to have groups of these guys and potentially more workshops than you will fit on a given floor unless it is fairly large. Larger than I would really want it to be. Can't do that yet. Need to disassemble the wagon in these workshops, and then we can get the surface crop area done and the subsurface crop area done. I know you don't do those, Clinidev, but I really want to be able to take advantage of massive cloth production. So one of the first micro forts we're going to do in terms of height within the fortress is going to be the Clothier's Guild and the Food Processing Guild, whatever you want to call it, the kitchen workers, for lack of a better word, who are doing all those animal and plant handling tasks. Clothiers and kitchen workers. Okay. what's still in the wagon. Plaster, some thread, sand, and stone. Nothing exciting or important. Okay, next thing's next. We immediately disassemble all the workshops. We've got to move all their stuff downstairs. It's, unfortunate that we've got them where they are, but don't care. Stuff's got to go downstairs. All the wagon, everything, it's all got to go down. So, once that's all disassembled, we can then move a bunch of stuff downstairs. But early on, we're going to use this as our hospital, but we're also going to use it as our communal meeting space. And we'll turn it off of meeting space later. But right now, this is where I want everybody to gather, so they're not gathered up there around the wagon on the surface. It's not so much that Romans were shockingly modern, Clinidev, it's that we moderns have shockingly copied such ancient people. Okay, now that we have all of these disassembled properly, we can excavate the remaining chunks of soil we need to get our surface crop plots up and running. If I had been thinking, I would have done this a little further away so that we would not have had to do the disassembly at all. We could have just waited, but now we will get it done quickly. Once that's dug out, this area will be perfect for surface farming. Probably the beds. They're freaking out because we moved all the beds when we disassembled the carpenter's workshop. This isn't intended to be a real stockpile. Its entire purpose is to keep things from growing above our fortress. We're going to need to actually make it a little larger than this, but for right now, that'll keep anything from growing right over the top of our pancakes slab. No, and they didn't just have concrete, they had good concrete, given the technology. They had access to volcanic ash, for one thing, in large quantities to use as part of their concrete construction. Right? I mean, it's not so much that that the Romans were shockingly modern, it's that we shockingly copy such ancient people. Alright, let's go ahead and get these two floors completely dug out right. Get them done right. Now, we're not going to obviously house our farmers in soil layers. That's clearly not intentional. But we need a place to put our... We're also going to need pasture space for the animals. We're going to have to do that as well. Maybe we don't excavate that centerpiece just yet. reptile men blowgunners down in our caverns fighting the trolls. And there's a lot of bashing going on. The troll has fallen over. It's probably not going to go well for the troll at this point, if there's more than one of them especially. Ooh, that sounded meaty. It looks like the troll has gotten a grip on him and has... Ooh, yeah, it's all over now. The troll gored him with a horn. Splat. Fight over. Yeah, troll got up, got a hold on him, and started bending and breaking parts off him, basically. Not a good place to be. And then finally gored him. Have to look, but I'm willing to bet that trolls are probably bigger and larger than reptile men on average.
The new season is summer.
So we're going to excavate a couple of pastures here, right in this first soil layer. And then we'll floor over them like we did above here with yard cloth, so to speak. Well, the kobolds have started to come and visit. That ain't good. Don't really want that forge there, but I want to get it underground where the kobolds ain't and built into a building so they can't pick it up and walk off with my anvil. Well, it looks like the troll went back for seconds and ended up in a fight with two, or possibly more, but at least two. Now there are three of them. This is getting out of hand. And they are now, they are curb stomping him at this point. Troll passes out from exhaustion, and at that point, it's all head blows from here on in. Well, we're not going to rush it. See, that's the beauty of it, I think. Development, for the most part, would proceed for the first year pretty much like my standard fort. Workshops and stockpiles, right down the central core. But early on, we're going to start picking one of these, probably the metalsmiths, because I need to try to get them into position as fast as possible. And we'll pick one of them and do their floor out to the level of microfort. In other words, nobody's going to move into their final domicile for a bit. They're all going to be in dormitories initially. And I'm not doing a guild hall the way you are, and I'm not practicing the population control, so I have to have a little bit of pressure tank tolerance, if you will. I want to see if the design can work without having to use the population settings to prevent immigration, for example. It's going to be a different challenge. We're still going to end up with the circles, but the difference is that we're not going to have a bedroom level. Public space will be arranged differently.
Won't work.
Well, that's the beauty. You're not going to have to, at least not initially. Since I intend to have surface crops, and since that's not really practical for all intents and purposes with the microfort separation. What we'll end up doing is we'll use our surface crop plots here to supply like our cloth for our cloth weavers eventually, is the hope. We'll use a subsurface plot here for subsurface crops for primary our fortress, and then we'll simply deliver them to the kitchen workers guild, which is going to be like right below that for processing, and then we'll just deliver them. Stash a handful of meals in each guild. They should move them en masse because they're moving them between stockpiles at that point. So we should get them moving them by the barrel instead of by the individual item. And then later when we get the separate areas laid in, we can knock off the subsurface crops and separate them out for each micro fort so that each one becomes more self-sufficient and self-contained. But initially, we can take advantage of our soil layers and abundance to get ourselves up off the ground and get our seeds banked without having to wait on trade, per se. I think that's going to work long haul. I think that starting with the circle and then moving out from there is going to work better for us in the long haul, given that we're not dealing with the advantage you have in the form of being able to bring everybody in, lock it all down, and know that you're not turning away migrants because you've pop capped it. If we were going to pop cap control it, we could probably run this that way. I mean, at that point, you can figure out what you want for your micro forts and pretty well macro it at that point. But I think we'll do the core, get our workshops up, and we may need to go larger than 15s for some of these, but this will work fine for like farms and pasture spaces. So on each floor where we're doing something, like I went down here with the forges, and this is too small because I want to have the smelters and the forges on the same floor. So, and probably the kilns and the glass furnaces too. So this may still be too small, but it's getting a lot closer. And then the floor below that's actually going to be waste because of the magma. We're going to dig like we have magma, and then we'll put it in place later. We can get away with that since we have lots and lots of fuel abundance. Might have to be clever with this particular guild. They may have to expand multiple floors or something because of the caverns showing up here. I really don't want you guys down there. You have to be careful when you're excavating ramps like this. A ramp, if they dig all the tiles out around it, even if the ramp doesn't go away, it is useless because there's nothing to climb up. They won't climb up to the far top here. There has to be a solid wall against the ramp for them to walk up, basically. You have to watch that when you dig ramps. In this case, I've chunked out that one tile to make sure that during the excavation process, when they're here, they didn't want to dig this out that way. We don't have a magma pipe, damn it. This isn't going to work at all. You. This was bad. Get back up topside, you dunderheads. So we get that ramp right there. It's kind of wrong. Normally we would have magma and we'd pump it in here and it would be great. Yeah, we'll see. Kind of screwed this forge floor up a little bit, but we'll make it work. Come on, boys, get that vent dug, please. Everything but. They'll end up doing it last just to laugh at me, I swear. Okay, to fix this now, we're going to have to fill in some of these holes with walls to get them all filled in. That's kind of dumb, but we'll get it done. It won't be done right away because it's not critical right away, but we will need to do it. Oy vey. All right. Now, I'm only going to run for about 15 more minutes tonight, guys, and then I'm going to knock off for tonight because we have been running way long, way many days now. So, before I go, take a moment here. Anybody got any questions for me before we head out? Before I sick you on some other poor, unsuspecting Dwarf Fortress channel, that is. Let me see who's out there. Well, don't head out yet. Don't head out yet. Stick around. Let's see who's out there today. Looks like we've got a guy out there doing a little fortress. He looks like he might be comparatively new and needs some assistance. I think maybe we can set you guys loose on him. See, now that I would do later. Or I'm going to have to set up an area that we irrigate alongside the caverns so we benefit from the cavern biome without actually being connected to the caverns. It's doable, but it's going to require a little more work than I'm going to be able to do right away. So being able to take advantage of the soil layers initially and then move towards that long term, for the spider silk especially, would be useful. Well, shucks, it doesn't want me to do it from here. We're going to have to do it the hard way. Hang on a minute. Harumph, harumph. Now I'm even doing it from Twitch and it won't let me start the raid. That's terrible. Oi. Damn it, Twitch, the one time I want you to do something. All right, let's see here. Well, that's going. Now that we've got that dug out, we need to give this guy a way to get over there because he was a dummy. And then they can go up the ramp. And now that they can go up the ramp, we can fill this back in and fix it next time. Okay, let's see if we can do it now. Wonder if they stopped broadcasting in the time it took me to look. Give me a second here, guys. Wondering if they stopped streaming. Nope, still there. Must not have raids on. What a shame. Well, all right. We'll pass you guys off to one of them 24/7 channels tonight, I guess. All right, guys. Have fun, and I will see you guys tomorrow night again at 7 p.m. for 37 Days of Dwarf.